One of the stories I argued for that was really hard to get green-lighted was about the war in Congo that had been raging for years, relatively unreported, and at that time it had killed more people than the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq combined. And I got it green-lighted, built my team, went. In fact, the team got there a day early because I had to anchor, and they presented me with a videotape of a woman they had found and said, here's a woman that we've videotaped who can talk about the war. In fact, she was raped in the war in Congo, and take a look at the videotape. And I watched the videotape. And what I saw was an interview with a woman in Africa. In other words, how an American would shoot a story about a woman in Africa. And I thought, no, we are going to tell the story. And I told this to, I said, thank you, but we're going to actually keep looking, because I wanted a story about your sister, about your mother, about your daughter, not a woman in Africa. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. About another human being. And so they agreed, and then we went looking. And we ended up, we had to travel. We found a hospital where a lot of victims were being brought into. And the doctor was just so upset because he was working on patient after patient from the war, and specifically women, because they were really targeted physically and sexually. He was so exasperated that he marched us right into an operating room. And we were stunned. And there was a young woman who was maybe 16, 17, lying underneath the sheet in the operating room, getting ready for surgery. The nurses were running around getting her ready. She was naked and she was shivering, and her hand was on a metal table, and it was shaking, shivering like this. And she was cold. And the men in my team just didn't know what to do, and I didn't know what to do, but I saw a young woman afraid. And as you would do, as any woman would do, I went to her and I mothered her. I held her hand. I said, it's going to be okay, be strong. I had no idea what was going on. And then I backed out of the room with my team. And we were traumatized. We didn't know what to say or do. The men were tearful, I was tearful, because obviously something was bad. Her legs were up in stirrups, the whole thing. And so we came back the next day, and I apologized. She didn't speak English, but I went and spoke through an interpreter, said I was sorry that I had come in. I didn't mean to be in her operating room. This is why we were here, and if she wanted to never see us again, that's fine, but if she wanted to tell us her story, we would like to tell the world. And she decided to speak to us. We shot the story in so that we couldn't identify her. We did that on our own because we knew once she told us that she was a victim of the rebels, we knew that she could be targeted again. So we'd shoot the interview like this, and then we shot a picture of her hand, or we tried to not identify her. She told us, she said, my name is Sifa. She told us that her parents were killed right in front of her. She told us the men who killed her parents took her, and they took her wherever they went for months. And then wherever they went, they chained her to a tree. And they abused her, sometimes using things to abuse her. And they broke her up so much inside that at one point they told her that she wasn't worth anything anymore. And they left her chained to a tree. And she screamed and cried, and some men from a nearby village were going by, found her, broke the chain, and carried her to this hospital where we found her. And where they were trying to repair her so that she could go to the bathroom normally again. Mm. And so I said to her, do you want revenge? And she said, no. What I want is to rise from this bed, to thank the men who saved me, to work for God, and maybe, if I'm lucky, to feel a mother's love again. In that moment, I knew we had found the voice of someone who lets us all know what's possible in us, the courage, the beauty, the power. She was not some woman in Africa. She was a woman in Africa who could have been our child, right, if we were lucky. And when that story went on nightly news, a story that nobody wanted to fund and cover, when that story went on nightly news, the phones lit up. People were calling and asking, you know, what can we do? How can we help this woman? One woman was called furious, saying, how could you put her on camera? Now you've made her vulnerable. Maybe she'll be victimized again. Americans were worrying about a little girl in Congo, caught in a war they knew nothing about, who spoke a language they did not speak, whose culture they didn't understand, in a place not every one of them would have found easily on a map, but they cared about her. That is something I'm proud of. And because that speaks to what I know exists in us, in addition to everything else. This capacity to care about another, the other, the one we don't know. And so that's the story of Sifa, who I know, as long as I have memory, I will think of.